The lock caught mid-turn while my own son stared through the gap and said, "You don't live here anymore, Mom." As I stood on the porch with arms full of groceries, his wife crossed her arms and smirked behind him. While the scent of my cinnamon candle still drifted through the doorway, they changed the locks on the house I raised him in. The same house where I buried his father, paid every bill, and hung every photo they've now erased. That's when I opened the folder in my glove box, the one with my name still on the deed. So I sold the house they stole from under me and let the buyers hand them the keys. About to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The grocery bags rustled softly against Diane's coat as she stepped onto the front porch, the familiar creak beneath her feet sounding sharper than usual in the quiet afternoon. The air carried the faint smell of wet pine from last night's rain, and somewhere down the street a neighbor's wind chime clinked lazily. She balanced the bags on her hip and reached for the doorknob, already anticipating the warmth of home. The quiet kitchen, the cinnamon candle she left burning, the photo of her late husband on the side table. The key slid into the lock, but instead of turning smoothly, it jammed. Diane frowned, tried again, harder. The metal scraped uselessly, refusing to move. For a moment she wondered if she had grabbed the wrong key from her ring. Mistakes happened, but the engraved brass tag with the little rose told her otherwise. One more turn. Nothing, solid resistance. Her heartbeat shifted, a dull, slow thud in her ears. She knocked gently, trying to ignore the sudden tightness in her throat. Footsteps approached, slow, heavy, purposeful. Then the door opened only a few inches, held in place by the chain lock. Bradley's face appeared in the gap, his body blocking the rest of the view inside. His expression was stone cold, composed, almost bored. "Yeah," he sighed, as if she were an inconvenience he'd been expecting. "It's just easier for everyone this way." Diane stared at him, the grocery bags digging painfully into her fingers. "Bradley, what are you talking about? My key isn't working." He didn't even blink. We changed the locks, figured it was time to establish some boundaries. Behind him, another shadow moved into view. Marla leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyebrows raised in a way Diane had learned meant judgment, not concern. "It's nothing personal," Marla added, the kind of voice people use when delivering bad news they're oddly proud of. "We just need space to get the place organized. It's been chaos with you in and out." Diane opened her mouth, closed it again, words scattered like startled birds. Chaos? She cooked, she cleaned, she paid utilities they never thanked her for. But the sentence she wanted to say, "This is my home," lodged somewhere deep and unreachable. Bradley exhaled sharply, impatience tightening his jaw. "Go get a room somewhere, Mom. We'll call you when things are settled." "Mom." The word felt thrown, not given. The chain rattled and the door clicked shut, not slammed but worse. Dismissing her gently, like someone extinguishing a candle. Diane stood motionless on the porch. Neighbors walked dogs, cars passed by, birds chattered in the oak tree overhead. Life continued with cruel normalcy. The grocery bags began to slip and apples spilled across the wooden boards, rolling toward the steps. Diane didn't pick them up. She walked slowly to her car, set the remaining bags in the passenger seat, and lowered herself behind the wheel. The silence inside felt suffocating and painfully loud all at once. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, her breath uneven. For hours she sat there, watching sunlight shift across the hood of the car, listening to the metallic tick of the cooling engine, feeling the weight of a home she no longer recognized pressing against her chest. Not a single call. Not a text asking if she was okay. Not even a glance toward the driveway window. Only absence. And the quiet reminder that grief wasn't limited to funerals. As twilight deepened, Diane finally reached for her phone, more out of instinct than intention. A notification sat at the top of her screen, an email forwarded from the title company. She opened it, expecting some bureaucratic message she couldn't emotionally process right now. But instead she saw her name. Legal ownership, Diane Whittaker. Status, active. Deed holder, shared tenancy. Transfer none recorded. Her breath caught. Her name wasn't gone. She hadn't been written out. They hadn't taken what mattered most, not yet. A slow, steady calm spread through her chest. Not peace, not anger, something colder, stronger, a clarity she didn't know she possessed anymore. She hit forward and typed on. Lie 3 words to Lenora, the one friend who still had a spine when no one else did. Is this valid? She hovered 1 second, then pressed send. The phone screen dimmed and reflected her face in the darkness of the car window, older than she remembered, but sharper too. A woman no longer asking to be allowed in. Somewhere deep in that reflection, something shifted. Not broken. Awakened. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Diane did not cry. She just waited. Still. Composed. Ready. The house lights flickered on inside, warm and bright without her. And Diane whispered to the empty car. That's fine for now. The email glowed against the dark interior of the car long after the screen dimmed. Diane finally set the phone down beside her and closed her eyes, letting the silence steady her pulse. Her mind drifted, unbidden, back to a different afternoon on that same porch years earlier when the world had still felt kind. It had been spring then, azaleas blooming, sunlight spilling across the steps like honey. She and her husband, Michael, had stood close together while the notary stamped the papers across the hood of his truck, laughing about how unnecessarily dramatic it felt to sign a deed outdoors. Equal owners, the notary had said, smiling as she handed over the official copy. 50-50, a partnership. Michael squeezed Diane's hand then, a warm, grounding gesture she still felt like phantom heat in her palm. A home is a promise, he had whispered, and no one breaks my promises. The memory flickered like film reel light against closed eyelids. After the funeral, the house had changed temperature, gone cold, gone unfamiliar. Diane still remembered the quiet hum of sympathy cards arriving, meals left on the porch, neighbors stopping by with careful voices. And then Bradley and Marla appeared, arms full of storage bins, smiles stretched too wide. We'll help you start sorting things, Bradley had said before she'd even taken off her funeral dress. The words sounded generous, but the speed felt like intrusion. They moved through rooms as though performing a task assigned, not grieving. Clothes folded, photo frames stacked, drawers emptied. The word pack hung in the air like a command. Diane had stood there, dazed, watching her husband's handwriting disappear into boxes she hadn't chosen. The casseroles were still warm on the counter when her life was being dismantled around her. But even then, something practical in her remained awake. She remembered every form she'd ever signed. Every signature that mattered. There had been no quitclaim deed. No transfer of rights. No conversation about surrendering anything she and Michael had built together. She had checked again later, quietly late at night while Bradley and Marla slept in guest rooms they took without asking. She combed through files, insurance folders, tax statements. Everyone bore 2 names. Hers wasn't written in pencil. Within weeks, Bradley had started speaking to her differently. Less son, more landlord. Do you mind knocking first? He'd asked once, standing in the hall outside what used to be her own bedroom. His voice carried the tone of someone asking a stranger not to touch their things. Marla followed soon after, redecorating entire rooms without warning, painting over the soft blue Diane had chosen with Michael, replacing curtains Diane had sewn by hand, rolling away the antique rug gifted by Michael's grandmother. Diane returned home from the grocery store one day to find her husband's favorite armchair sitting on the curb like trash waiting for collection. We're creating a better layout, Marla had said, waving a dismissive hand. More modern. Modern. The word tasted like rust. Piece by piece, space by space, they pushed her outward until the walls themselves felt unfamiliar, until she walked through the hallway like someone drifting through a museum exhibit she didn't belong in. And now, tonight, locked out completely, Diane felt the truth settle inside her with a kind of icy precision. They had never owned what they believed they controlled. They had only occupied it. She inhaled slowly, opened the glove compartment, and pulled the small accordion file she kept for emergencies. Receipts, mortgage statements, homeowner insurance policies, tax bills, photocopies of everything Michael once insisted they keep just in case. She smoothed the documents against her knees, the paper whispering like dry leaves. This time, she wasn't organizing from fear. She was assembling evidence. A folder for legal. A folder for financial. A new one for emotional, a record of what they took and what they couldn't touch. Her phone buzzed once against the seat beside her. A new message flashed on the screen, Lenora's name bold at the top. "We need to talk tonight." Diane stared at the words, feeling the quiet shift again inside her, sharp and electric. Not grief. Not defeat. Movement. She reached for the ignition, started the car. In.The pulled away from the curb without looking back at the house glowing behind her. The porch light flickered one last time in her rearview mirror, just long enough to feel like a warning or a beginning. She drove into the darkness with the folder beside her. The war had already started. The parking lot behind Adams Realty was nearly empty when Diane pulled in, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. The streetlights above buzzed faintly, throwing thin amber halos onto the cracked pavement. Diane sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, letting her pulse settle. The folder of documents rested on the passenger seat like a weight she no longer feared carrying. Inside, the office lights were low, warm, inviting. Through the glass door she could see Lenora seated at her desk, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, reviewing a stack of closing documents with the precision of a surgeon. The overhead lamp cast a sharp gold outline around her silver hair, giving her the presence of someone who had seen too many wars fought over wood and foundation. When the bell above the door chimed, Lenora looked up immediately. Her brow softened the second she recognized Diane. "You got my message," she said quietly, rising from her chair. Diane nodded, stepping forward. The warmth in the room contrasted painfully with the cold metal of the locked door she had faced hours earlier. Lenora gently guided her into a chair, studying her expression without asking the obvious question. Diane opened the folder and spread the documents across the desk: mortgage statements, tax forms, insurance policies, recorded deed copies with two names printed clearly side by side. Lenora scanned them, flipping pages with deliberate care. After several minutes, she removed her glasses and leaned back. "Well," she said, voice steady and certain, "they may think they've boxed you out, but legally you own half that house, clean and uncontested." Diane exhaled slowly, as if releasing months of silent suffocation. Lenora continued, fingers laced together. "You have every right to list your portion, full market authority. They can scream, throw tantrums, hire lawyers, but they can't stop the sale." The words didn't ignite rage. They settled like steel inside Diane's ribcage. "I don't want to fight, Lenora," she said, her voice quiet but unshakably firm. "I want closure, and I want them gone." Lenora watched her for a long moment, measuring resolve, not fear. "Then we do this quietly," she said at last. "Off-market, private investors, clean cash, no sign in the yard, no public listing, no warning. We control the paperwork, the timeline, and the exit." She slid a slim set of forms across the desk. "This is an agency agreement. Once you sign, I can start lining up buyers." The pen felt heavier than it looked, but Diane didn't hesitate. Her signature flowed across the page, steady, elegant, final. Lenora closed the folder and tapped it once with her palm. "Good, now let's get you back inside your home." The locksmith's truck rumbled quietly in the driveway. 20 minutes later, Diane watched from the sidewalk as the man worked, tools glinting under the thin wash of moonlight. The night smelled of wet grass and cut wood, the kind of scent that used to mean summer gardening with Michael. Now it smelled like reclaiming ground. With a soft click, the last screw turned. The locksmith stepped back, nodding. "You're set, new key, new start." Lenora placed the key into Diane's palm and closed her fingers around it like she was sealing a pact. "They don't know I exist in this story," Lenora murmured. "Let's keep it that way." The house was silent when Diane stepped inside, too silent. The air felt stale, as though no one breathed here anymore. She walked slowly through the hallway, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. Every room felt altered, rearranged, unfamiliar. Family photos gone, walls bare, carpet replaced. Furniture she had chosen with love replaced by cold, catalog-perfect pieces. She felt like a guest in the place she had built, like someone trespassing in her own life. In the living room, she paused, letting her hand rest on the wall as if feeling the pulse of something buried. This was never theirs, she whispered into the empty room. Not anger. Not grief. Something calmer, sharper, deadlier. She turned, walked to the front door and locked it from the inside, her lock, her key, her rights. On her way out, she flicked off the lights one by one, leaving the house in darkness. The same darkness she had sat in earlier, waiting for her next move. But this time the waiting was over. Tomorrow buyers would walk through. And Bradley and Marla would have no idea their time was already gone. The house looked different in the morning light, cleaner, sharper, almost unfamiliar. Diane stood in the center of the living room, holding a vase of white lilies against her chest, breathing in their cold, sweet perfume. She placed them on the kitchen isla. N.The, adjusting the stems until the arrangement felt balanced. One last touch, she wiped away a fingerprint from the marble countertop with the edge of her sleeve. No photos. No clutter. No history. Everything personal was packed into the trunk of her car before sunrise. The home felt like a blank slate now, something unclaimed, untouched, no longer tethered to memory or guilt. Lenora arrived precisely at 9. Dark blazer, hair swept back, expression composed and unreadable, like someone heading to war in silk and pearls. "They'll be here in 5, she said softly, glancing around. "It's perfect." Diane nodded, words felt unnecessary. The silence between them was steady, purposeful. Through the bay window, Diane watched the investor couple step out of their car and walk up the driveway, well-dressed, confident, the kind of people who moved like decisions made themselves in their presence. Their realtor smiles were polite, but their eyes were calculating, sweeping across the lawn, the neighborhood, the roofline. Lenora greeted them at the door and Diane stepped back, blending into the quiet like part of the architecture. She watched them walk through the house, their voices low, impressed. "This light is unbelievable," the woman murmured, running her fingertips across the windowsill. "And the lot size rare around here," her husband added, stopping to take in the open floor plan. They didn't ask where the family photos were. People like them could smell emotional residue, and this house now carried none. Diane followed a few steps behind, hands clasped calmly. She watched them pause in the master bedroom, once hers and Michael's. The sunlight spread across the hardwood floor, glowing like a long-forgotten blessing. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," the woman said, glancing at her husband with a spark of certainty. "If the numbers make sense, I don't want to lose it." "We're ready for a fast close," he added. "Cash clean, no contingencies." Diane felt something shift low in her chest, not triumph, not relief. Closure inevitable and unshakable. They returned to the kitchen island. The man clicked open a sleek leather folder, pulling out an offer already drafted, pen poised. "It won't last on the market," he said, "so we'd like to make a near-asking offer today. We can transfer earnest money by this afternoon." Lenora looked to Diane, not asking, simply witnessing. Diane reached for the pen. Her signature flowed across the page the same way it had the night before, controlled, elegant, deliberate. One step closer. An hour later, in a quiet corner booth of a cafe 3 streets away, Diane and Lenora sat across from Carla Shin, the probate attorney Lenora trusted more than anyone else in the city. Carla's eyes moved with sharp, methodical speed as she reviewed the contract and supporting documents spread across the table. "Everything checks out," Carla said, tapping her finger twice on the deed copy. "Clean title, recorded history is flawless, nothing they can contest. I'll handle the escrow, filings, and notifications." She slid a slim stack of disclosure forms toward Diane. "Sign here and here." The paper felt warm beneath Diane's hand, as though life pulsed through it. When she finished, she lifted the buyer's offer from the table, opened a new email on her phone, and attached the documents. "Subject, proceed." She hit send. Carla's laptop chimed seconds later. She closed it with a soft click. "Escrow begins today," Carla said, "and nobody living in that house will know until they're forced to." Diane sat back, breathing out slowly, steady, certain, unshaken. The war they started quietly was about to end the same way. Her phone buzzed, a new message, short and sharp. Title initiated, HOA notified, clock started. Outside, a truck rumbled past the window, the kind used for moving furniture. For a moment, Diane imagined the look on Bradley's face when reality arrived without knocking. And she didn't smile. She simply folded her hands and waited. By Monday morning, the gears were already turning. Carla's fingers moved across her keyboard with surgical precision, each keystroke punctuated by the soft click of finality. She uploaded the last packet of escrow documents, added the title transfer notification, and digitally stamped the seal that officially set the irreversible clock in motion. The computer chimed, screen flashing, submission complete. Transfer notice sent to HOA, she said, voice low and even. They'll issue occupant notification letters by midday. No celebration, just execution. Diane watched the progress bar fade, feeling the quiet hum of inevitability settle into her bones. There was no satisfaction in it, only the clean, cool sensation of a blade sliding into its mark. By early afternoon, an HOA-issued envelope slid through the front door slot of the house on Rosewood Lane. Addressed in bold type. To all occupants, legal notice of property transfer. Marla's heels clicked sharply across the hardwood floor as she stalked toward it, irritation crackling off her like static. She tore the envelope open with her thumb, scanning the first lines. Her expression shifted violently, curiosity to confusion, confusion to panic, panic to something feral. "Bradley," she shouted, voice splitting the stillness. He appeared from the hallway, face already tightening. "What now?" She shoved the letter at him. He read it once. Twice. His jaw muscle twitched visibly. No, 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 this has to be wrong. And then his phone rang. Diane's name pulsed across the screen. He answered without breath. "What the hell did you do?" In the silence that followed, Bradley could hear nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing. Because Diane didn't answer. Not a word. The call connected, the call held, and Diane let him sit inside the storm he built, alone. He shouted anyway, voice cracking into the void. "You can't sell this house, you can't do this, you don't even live here anymore." No reply. Just breath, calm, steady. And then the soft click of disconnection. Bradley threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. Marla flinched. Across town, Diane sat in a quiet bank office signing the withdrawal form for her share of the closing proceeds. The banker printed a receipt and slid it softly across the polished desk. "Would you like this transferred to your private account ending in 1134? "Yes," Diane said simply. Her voice didn't shake. The screen updated. The transfer processed. 6 figures moved silently, cleanly, safely. Money that had been sitting frozen beneath grief, unreachable when she still believed home was built on loyalty, not control. She folded the receipt and placed it in her folder under a new tab labeled Exit. 2 days later, a moving truck rolled up to the house like a quiet confession. No horn, no loud backup beeps, just the low hum of engines idling. Diane walked up the driveway behind the movers, her steps even, her gaze forward. She didn't look at the window, though she could feel the heat of Bradley's stare burning through the blinds. "Just these items," she said to the foreman, gesturing toward the short list clipped to his clipboard. "Nothing more, nothing less." He nodded, no questions asked. They carried out what little remained of her history. Michael's writing desk. A cedar chest filled with letters. A rocking chair her mother left her. The life they thought they could erase. Bradley appeared at the door eventually, face flushed, breath sharp, desperation leaking through every pore. "You can't do this," he hissed. Diane looked at him, really looked. No anger. No trembling. Just certainty. "I already did." The movers closed the truck. Padlock snapped shut. Engine turned over. She walked past him without slowing. That evening, as the sun dropped low and gold across the city, Diane's phone lit up with a message from Lenora. "Closing confirmed, next Tuesday, 9:00 a.m., irreversible." Diane read it once, then turned her phone face down on the table. Outside, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, like something shifting, breaking, falling. It wasn't the end. It was the signal. The glass doors of Shin Park probate law slammed open so hard they rattled against the stopper. The receptionist jolted upright, pen clattering from her hand. Bradley barreled in first, face red, chest heaving, followed by Marla, whose steps were clipped and poisonous like stilettos striking bone. "We need to speak to Carla Shin right now," Marla barked, slapping her palm against the counter. Before the receptionist could respond, Carla stepped into the hallway. Perfect posture. Pressed charcoal suit. Expression unreadable. "Then follow me," she said, voice cool as polished steel. She led them into a conference room and closed the door behind them with a quiet click that felt louder than any shout. Bradley didn't wait for permission. "What the hell is going on?" he exploded, stepping forward fast enough that the table rattled. Carla didn't flinch. Instead, she slid a neatly bound packet across the table toward him with a single finger. A silent invitation. Or a verdict. Bradley hesitated, then snatched it up, flipping pages wildly. Each turn drained more color from his face. "What is this?" he demanded. "We never approved any sale, we never signed anything, we live there." Carla leaned back, folding her hands calmly in her lap. "That packet includes the deed copy showing joint ownership between Michael and Diane Whitaker. No transfer or relinquishment was ever recorded. It also includes the executed purchase agreement and escrow confirmation. The sale is valid, legal, and at this point irreversible." Marla stepped forward, voice sharp enough to cut skin. "She betrayed us after everything we did for her, moving in to help, organizing the house, taking care of things. She sold from under us like we were nothing." Carla's gaze shifted slowly to meet hers. No anger. Just scalpel precision. "You should have checked who owned the house before changing the locks." The sentence hung in the air, clean, devastating, surgical. Bradley's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His breath stuttered, fury choking into disbelief. Carla continued, tone steady as contract ink. "Escrow funds have already been dispersed. The wire transfer posted this morning, 6 figures cleared." Marla blinked hard, eyes glassy with something that wasn't grief, panic. Bradley slammed the packet against the table. "This is illegal, we'll stop it, we'll sue, you can't just." "You're free to pursue litigation," Carla replied, not raising her voice even half an inch. "But courts do not freeze valid transfers without evidence of fraud." Her eyes sharpened. "And I promise you there is none." Silence swallowed the room. Bradley's hands balled into fists, knuckles whitening until they looked brittle enough to snap. His breath fractured into short, broken bursts. "When is the closing?" he ground out, voice scraping like broken glass. Carla didn't blink. "Next Tuesday, 9 a.m., the buyer's moving truck arrives directly after." The words detonated. Marla staggered back a step, gripping the edge of the chair like the floor had tilted. "You can't do this, this is our home." Carla gathered the remaining documents into a clean stack. "No, it never was." At that exact moment, across the city, Diane sat in the quiet of her car outside the bank, watching a text message appear on her screen. "Wire posted, funds secured." She traced the words with her thumb, steady, calm, unshaken, then locked her phone and looked out through the windshield at the long afternoon shadows stretching across the street. No trembling. No second thoughts. Just closure moving toward her like a tide. In the reflection on the glass, she didn't look like someone who had lost anything. She looked like someone who had finally taken back everything that mattered. Another vibration. A new message from Lenora. Buyers confirm truck arrival scheduled, Tuesday morning, 8:45 sharp. Diane closed her eyes for a single breath. The trap was already closed. The pounding on the door started just after sunset, violent, frantic, shaking the frame. Diane stood in the hallway of her small rental apartment, feet still bare from slipping out of her shoes moments earlier. The walls trembled with each hit, but she didn't move. Through the peephole, the distorted fisheye view showed Bradley on the porch step, face flushed, eyes wild, hair disheveled as if he'd been pulling at it. He paced, slammed his palm flat against the door again, then leaned forward, breathing hard enough to fog the glass. "Open the door, Diane." His voice cracked, raw and jagged. "We need to talk. Need not ask, not apologize. Demand." Diane stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. In the dim light of the hallway, her reflection in the mirror beside the door looked calm, unnervingly so. The storm outside no longer reached inside her. Bradley hit the door again. "I know you're in there, you can't hide from this." But she wasn't hiding. She was choosing. She reached into the side drawer of the entry table, pulled out the printed deed copy she'd prepared earlier, the one stamped and signed, showing her legal right in black and white. She bent down, slid it under the door with slow precision, and stepped back. A beat of silence followed. Then the rustle of paper being snatched up. "What is this?" Bradley muttered, voice muffled but sharp. Another pause, a sound like a wounded animal. "You think this means anything, you think this fixes what you've done." Diane closed her eyes. "Fixes nothing, reveals everything." Bradley kicked the door, not enough to break it, but enough to shake the air. "You're pathetic," he shouted. "You betrayed your own family." Family. The word hit harder than the pounding had, but not painfully. Just honestly. She watched him through the peephole as his fury cracked around the edges, dissolving into something uglier, fear, maybe, loss, the realization that there was nothing left to bargain with. Finally, he turned and stormed down the steps, the echo of his footsteps fading into the night. Diane rested her hand against the door, her palm warm against the cool wood. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She simply breathed. Her phone buzzed on the console table. A message from a number she knew well. "Eli, did you really sell it?" For a moment, her chest tightened, not from regret but from the weight of what innocence costs when adults choose war. She typed slowly, carefully. "Diane, I sold my share. That was the only honest part left." 3 dots pulsed. Then vanished. Then returned. Then disappeared again. He didn't send anything else. In that silence, hurt more than any scream from Bradley ever could. Half an hour later, a gentle knock replaced the violent ones from before. Soft, deliberate, respectful. Diane opened the door this time. Lenora stood with a bottle of champagne wrapped in dark tissue paper, no theatrics, no gloating, just a small, steady smile. "To clean exits," she said simply. Diane accepted the bottle, fingers brushing Lenora's, not quite steady anymore, but not weak either. Inside, they set the bottle on the counter without opening it. Some victories weren't meant to be toasted yet. Diane's laptop chimed from across the room, an incoming email. The subject line glowed bright in the dim kitchen light. "Checks cleared, all obligations satisfied." The final thread cut clean. Diane closed the laptop with a quiet click, the sound soft but absolute. She looked out the window at the night sky, still, starless, waiting. Somewhere across the city, she imagined Bradley and Marla pacing like animals cornered in a cage they built themselves. And she felt it, something shifting, something rising. Not revenge. Resolution. This chapter wasn't over, not by a long stretch. Next came fallout. Next came consequences. The storm they unleashed was finally turning back toward them. The envelope arrived on Carla's desk just after noon, thick, overstuffed, the kind of document packet that screamed desperation instead of strategy. The receptionist set it down with raised eyebrows, and Carla slid a letter opener cleanly along the seal, never rushing, never flinching. Inside, a civil complaint filed by Marla Whittaker claiming emotional damages, loss of residence stability, and fraudulent concealment of real estate transfer. Half the pages were dramatic language and exaggerated accusations, the rest were hollow legal threats held together by bold fonts and highlighter marks. Carla let out a slow breath, half amusement, half pity. She opened her phone and took a picture of the first page, then forwarded it to Diane with a brief message. "Received, no concern, call soon." Diane read it seated at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. She didn't react, not with anger, not with exhaustion. Instead, she reached calmly for the accordion file she kept at her side like armor and began sorting. "Deed copies." Tax records. HOA filings. Emails. The title company letter proving her ownership uninterrupted since purchase. She attached each scanned page into a single email and typed only 2 words. Use these. Then hit send. 24 hours later, Carla stood in a courtroom hallway, dark suit immaculate, hair pinned back with military precision. She carried a slim folder, no theatrics, no stacks of papers, only what mattered. Marla and Bradley arrived moments later, breathless from rushing, panic etched into every line of their faces. They looked like people clinging to the last plank of a sinking ship. Carla ignored them entirely. When the clerk called the case forward, the judge reviewed the filings, flipping briskly through the pages. Not a single expression changed on his face. He looked up. Emergency motion for injunction to pause transfer is denied. Marla gasped so sharply it echoed. Bradley's shoulders collapsed inward, anger simmering under humiliation. The judge continued, voice crisp and final. Ownership documentation is clean, there is no evidence of fraud or misconduct. The sale is legal, binding, and in process. Court will not interfere. The gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. Case dismissed. Carla nodded once, a gesture as understated as a lifted blade, and gathered her folder. She walked past Bradley and Marla without acknowledgement, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. Marla lunged forward, voice trembling on the edge of breaking. You can't let her do this to us. That house is ours. He grew up there. She doesn't care about family. Carla didn't look back. The court cares about facts, not theatrics, she said, her tone even and devastating. And facts are the only language Diane speaks now. Then she walked out. Across town, the buyers stood on the front lawn of the Rosewood property with their contractor. Bradley approached them fast, chest puffed, face tight, words loaded like ammunition. You're making a huge mistake, he said, blocking their path. We didn't approve any sale. She tricked you. You can't move in. The investor husband didn't even blink. We purchased legally. Escrow is complete. This conversation is over. He turned his back. The contractor followed. Bradley stood alone in the yard he once lorded over. For the first time, he looked small. Diane sat by her apartment window as afternoon light spilled gold across the floor, her phone resting screen down beside her. She hadn't spoken once, not to the court, not to the buyers, not to Bradley or Marla. Silence had become her weapon, not her wound. Her email pinged, vibrating softly against the wood table. Carla, case dismissed. No further action required. Closing remains on schedule. Diane closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Relief didn't rush in. It settled, layered, earned. Outside, wind brushed through the trees, soft, steady, patient, like the beginning of something larger. She opened her eyes. This wasn't victory. This was dismantling. The real cost was just beginning. The morning before closing, Diane sat beside the window in Carla's office, the city skyline cutting sharp edges against a washed-out sky. Rain tapped lightly against the glass, soft, steady, like fingertips drumming impatience. Carla slid a document envelope across the polished table, its weight disproportionate to its size. Final title report from escrow, Carla said, voice low but steady. Just a formality, but I want you to see it. Diane opened the folder carefully, smoothing the top page with her fingertips. At first glance, the statements looked routine: loan history, remaining balance, release documentation already prepared for closing. Then one line stopped her cold. Second mortgage, executed 11 months after death of Michael Whitaker. Amount $214,000. Signatory Bradley T. Whitaker. A tightening sensation gripped Diane's chest, not shock, not confusion, but a cold, precise recognition. She traced the line once, then again, reading each digit as though they were carved into stone. Carla watched her, expression unreadable. You weren't informed of this, you didn't sign anything, and the title record confirms no spousal consent was filed. Diane lifted her gaze, eyes steady. He used the house, he borrowed against it. Carla nodded once, sharp, decisive. Without legal authority, which means the bank has a problem, and they know it. She tapped her phone screen, pulling up an email already waiting. They opened an inquiry the moment escrow flagged it. The investigator called this morning. You're cleared completely. The words dropped like clean steel. Diane leaned back slowly, absorbing the truth, the scale, the betrayal, the sheer audacity. While she had been grieving, cooking, holding together the remnants of a home, Bradley had been quietly bleeding equity from a house he didn't own. This is why they rushed to move in, Diane murmured. Why they changed the locks, why they pushed me out. Carla's eyes softened just slightly, respect, not sympathy. They weren't protecting the house, they were protecting the secret. Across town, in the living room that no longer legally belonged to them, Bradley and Marla stared at the same document. It lay open on the coffee table between them, the air thick with panic. The page numbers blurred as Bradley's hands shook violently. They can't do this, he rasped, voice cracking, breath shallow. They can't make us pay this, the sale money fixes it, we just need the proceeds. Marla's eyes were wide, glassy, frantic. What proceeds, she whispered. Her half is already gone, that leaves ours, and look. She jabbed her finger against the lower half of the page. Outstanding balance due immediately from borrowers of record upon title transfer. Bradley stared, horror dawning slow and suffocating. That's everything, he whispered, everything we thought we were getting, everything we planned. The room seemed to shrink around them, walls tightening like a fist. And without the sale money, Marla pressed, voice rising into hysteria, we don't have the cash, do you understand? We don't have it, we're underwater. Bradley dropped into a chair, head in his hands, his voice was barely a breath. She knew she planned this. Back at Carla's office, Diane watched the clouds shift and break, light pushing through in quiet beams like a curtain lifting. Carla closed the folder and folded her hands. The debt comes out of their portion at closing, they walk away with nothing, not a dollar. And mine? Diane asked, not greedy, not eager, just confirming the truth. I structured your disbursement through a protected channel, Carla said. Your funds are legally insulated, nothing can touch them. The words flowed through Diane like a warm current, softening something deep and long bruised. Carla continued, her tone precise. When the sale closes, the bank collects the remaining balance from their share. They will owe additional funds out of pocket. It will follow them. Diane pressed her palm flat against the table, grounding herself. So the house they fought over, she said quietly, was never security. It was debt waiting to surface. Carla nodded. And surface it did. At that moment, Diane's phone buzzed, a new message, short, clipped. Buyer carrier scheduled, moving truck confirmed, 8:45 Tuesday. Finality wrapped in logistics. Wind rattled the window behind her, sharp, sudden, almost like applause. Diane rose, gathering her folder. She turned toward the door, shoulders straight, breath steady. Carla paused her with one last sentence. Sometimes justice isn't loud, she said. Sometimes it just arrives. Diane met her gaze. And sometimes, she answered softly, it takes everything they thought they stole. She walked out into the rain, unhurried, unbroken. Behind her, the storm finally broke open. Not on her head. On theirs. The morning of the closing smelled like pine and rain. The storm that had broken overnight left the street glistening, puddles shining silver beneath a pale sun. Diane parked a few spaces down from the house on Rosewood Lane, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. Her pulse was steady, her breath even. This would be the last time. The buyers stood waiting by the front door, a young couple with hopeful eyes and warm smiles, the kind of people who looked like beginnings rather than endings. The woman nodded gently. We thought you might want one final walkthrough, she said softly. No pressure, just space to say goodbye. Diane appreciated the quiet respect more than words could express. She stepped into the house, no key needed now, the lock was temporary, symbolic only. The air inside felt different. Empty rooms echoed. Dust motes floated like suspended memories. Silence held a kind of peace she hadn't felt here in years. She walked slowly down the hallway, her fingers grazing the freshly painted wall. It no longer smelled like lemon cleaner or Michael's aftershave. It smelled like newness, like someone else's story about to begin. Room by room, she passed through spaces that once carried the weight of a life built and a life dismantled. The master bedroom bare, sunlight stretching across the floor like a warm hand. The kitchen stripped clean, no laughter, no arguments, no late-night tea. The living room hollow where Michael's chair once stood. And then, near the sliding glass door leading to the backyard, she saw it. A small cardboard box. Taped loosely, one corner crushed. Markers scrawled across the top in rushed handwriting. Her junk. The words hit harder than any insult spoken aloud. Diane knelt slowly, hands steady as she peeled back the tape and lifted the flaps. Inside, nestled against each other like forgotten organs. A photo from their wedding day, Michael lifting her veil, eyes crinkled in laughter. The scarf she knitted for his birthday, soft wool still smelling faintly of cedar. And beneath them, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, Michael's journal. Her breath caught, she touched the leather cover, fingertips tracing the worn spine. His handwriting peeked through, looping, confident, alive. This wasn't junk. This was the heart of everything. She closed the box gently, holding it against her chest as if it were something fragile and still beating. Then she rose, walked back through the empty house, slower this time, not with grief but with reverence. At the front door she paused. The young couple stood waiting outside, giving her space. The morning breeze lifted her hair slightly, cool and clean. Diane stepped out, turned back and locked the door behind her one final time, the click echoing like a book snapping shut. That chapter was finished. She descended the porch steps without looking back. Halfway to her car, her phone buzzed. A message preview blinked across the screen, Marla's name attached to it like a bruise. You ruined everything. Diane stared at the words for a long, still moment. Then she pressed the side button and let the screen go dark. No reply. Some conversations did not deserve breath. She placed the box gently on the passenger seat, resting her hand atop it as though steadying a heartbeat. Outside, a soft wind rustled the leaves on the trees, whispering through branches like something finally exhaled. Diane looked at the house one last time, not with longing but with a quiet acknowledgement. Whatever lived here is finished. She started the engine. The moving truck turned the corner behind her, headlights gliding across the pavement like ghosts arriving late to their own funeral. And Diane drove forward away from the wreckage toward something unnamed. The days after the closing unfolded like soft fabric, slow, quiet, undramatic, no slammed doors, no court filings, no voices raised against wood, just morning light drifting through thin curtains, the smell of coffee and silence that didn't ache anymore. Diane found herself walking more. Past the bakery where she and Michael once bought Sunday bread. Past the river path where the air smelled like wet leaves in memory. Past neighbors she had known for years but never truly spoken to. It surprised her, the number of people who stopped her. Mrs. Conway from 2 houses down paused while trimming her roses. We always wondered how long you'd let them treat you that way, she said softly. I never liked how Marla spoke to you, none of us did. A man from the corner, whom Diane had never heard say more than hello, nodded with quiet sincerity. Good for you, he said, about time somebody stood up to them. Not gossip. Not pity. Recognition. Diane felt something loosen in her chest, like a knot beginning to untangle. Lenora insisted she eat something other than toast and tea. So they sat at a little cafe tucked into the brick storefronts downtown, sunlight catching in their glasses, the table between them scattered with salad bowls and warm bread. They didn't toast. They didn't analyze. They just talked about books, about gardens, about the neighbor kid learning to ride a bike and crashing into the mailbox 3 times in one afternoon. Normal things. Human things. Lenora angled her head, studying Diane with a thoughtful smile. You don't look like a woman who lost anything, she said quietly. Diane paused, hands resting loosely around her mug. No, she said, I don't feel like one. And it was true. Grief and battle had stopped defining her. She felt light, like someone moved out of shadow and into her own skin. Later that week, she went to a meeting of a local book club at the library, something she hadn't done in years. She sat among strangers and listened as they debated character motives and plot arcs. She found herself laughing unexpectedly and freely at a comment from a woman with bright red glasses. Connection didn't feel like a risk anymore. It felt like a return. That night, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A name she hadn't seen since the night Bradley pounded on her door. Eli. The message was short, unsteady around the edges. Eli, I miss you, can I visit? The words blurred slightly before her eyes, but not from tears. From relief. Her fingers hovered only a second before typing. Diane, yes, lunch tomorrow, anywhere you like. The reply came almost instantly. Eli, thank you. Two words that sounded like apology and longing and hope stitched together. They met at a diner tucked behind the high school football field. Eli looked older than she remembered, taller, shoulders squared, but eyes softer than Bradley's ever were. He slid into the booth across from her, not speaking at first. Then he said quietly, I just wanted to see you. No argument. No defense. No sides. They talked about school, about music, about a stray cat he had been feeding in the backyard. They didn't discuss the house or the sale, not once, and that silence was a gift. When they stood to leave, he hugged her tight, sudden, honest. I'm sorry, he murmured against her shoulder. She pressed her cheek to his hair. There's nothing to be sorry for. For once, she meant it. Back home, Diane opened her laptop. An email sat waiting from Carla. All ownership transfers officially recorded with county, closing final, case closed. No exclamation mark. No dramatic phrasing. Just the final brick set into place. Diane leaned back in her chair, letting the words sink into the quiet. Final. Finished. Free. Outside, late sunlight poured through the window, warm and gold. Dust and light danced together in the air like tiny sparks. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. A voicemail text preview appeared. Bradley, we need to talk, it's urgent. Diane stared at the screen, not shaken, not afraid, only steady. Some storms circle back when they realize the door has already closed. The voicemail Bradley left sat untouched on Diane's phone for hours, just a silent rectangle of text previewing urgency and panic. She didn't listen. Instead, she set the phone face down beside a cup of cooling tea and watched sunlight stretch across the kitchen table. But by nightfall, something inside her, a steady intuition, told her to press play. Bradley's voice spilled out harsh and uneven. You need to call me back, this isn't over, you can't take Eli away from us, you don't get to decide everything, this is still our family whether you like it or not. Then another voice, Marla's, sharp, clipped, desperate. We'll make sure you never speak to him again, watch us. The message ended in static, like wind through broken glass. Diane sat very still, hands resting flat against the table, absorbing every syllable, not afraid, not surprised, just deeply, profoundly tired. She forwarded the voicemail to Carla with a single line. Handle this. Within minutes, her phone buzzed. Carla, on it, I'll call you in the morning. The next day, Diane sat in Carla's office again, this time with the calm of someone watching a storm from behind reinforced glass. Carla slid another stack of documents across the table, a copy of a petition Bradley and Marla had filed late the night before. Request for limited guardianship over Eli Whitaker. Filed under claims of emotional instability and interference by an outside party. They had used him like a shield, trying to weaponize custody so they could regain control, so they could punish, so they could rewrite the narrative. They're attempting to block your contact, Carla said, voice clipped, controlled. They're arguing that you're influencing him and undermining parental authority. It's flimsy, desperate, but will respond. Diane exhaled slowly. Do what needs to be done. Carla didn't hesitate. I already filed a motion to intervene. The hearing is this afternoon. It won't take long. She paused, meeting Diane's eyes with something that looked like admiration. You don't have to attend. I'll handle everything. For the first time in years, Diane allowed herself the luxury of letting someone else fight for her. The courthouse echoed with footsteps, polished floors gleaming beneath cold overhead lights. Carla stood before the judge with her usual precise confidence, presenting documentation piece by piece, Eli's grades, guardian recommendations from his school counselor, text messages between him and Diane showing nothing but support and stability. Then she laid down the voicemail transcript like the final nail in a coffin. Your Honor, this guardianship attempt is clearly retaliatory, filed without standing, without evidence, and in bad faith as a response to the completed sale of property. Marla's voice trembled from the other side of the courtroom. She's turning him against us. The judge raised a hand, shutting her down. Enough, there is no basis for this petition. There is no threat, no danger, no claim with merit. His gavel struck sharply. In.The final. Motion denied, request dismissed, do not file again. Bradley closed his eyes, shoulders collapsing like a structure losing its last support beam. Carla gathered her folder without ceremony and walked out. That weekend, Eli stood on Diane's porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes bright but watery. She opened the door and he stepped forward before she could speak, wrapping his arms around her ribs tightly like someone gripping the edge of safety. I just needed to be here, he whispered. Diane held him close, her hand resting gently against the back of his head, steady and sure. You always have a place that's yours, she said softly, no matter where I live. Eli nodded against her shoulder, breathing uneven but relieved. For a long time they just stood there, no war, no noise, no sides, just family, real and unbroken. Later that night, Diane's phone buzzed once more. One final message from Marla. You win, you always wanted him more than us anyway. Diane read it once, then deleted it without a second thought. Because winning had never been the point. Protecting had. Outside, the night air was warm, humming softly with crickets. Inside, the quiet felt like home, not a place but a person. And somewhere very close, another storm was already gathering. The legal office smelled faintly of paper and lemon oil, clean, precise, unburdened. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, falling in long, quiet bands across a polished oak table. Diane sat with her hands gently folded, the pen resting beside her like something ceremonial instead of practical. The estate attorney, Margaret Liu, adjusted her glasses and opened a fresh file. All right, Diane, she said softly, ready to start from the beginning. Diane nodded once, no hesitation, no tremor in her voice. From the beginning. Margaret slid a blank will template toward her, crisp and unmarked. A page waiting to decide the future. For the first time since Michael's funeral, Diane felt a sense of gravity that wasn't grief. This wasn't loss. This was authorship. Name by name, line by line, she reshaped everything. Primary beneficiaries. Eli Michael Whitaker, 100% estate distribution, to be placed in a protected trust until age 25. Access conditioned on education, stability, and independent adulthood. Executor. Lenora Adams, chosen not just for competence but loyalty. Legal review. Carla Shin, signature and certification authority. And then the most important section, the part that would end a lineage of entitlement. Margaret turned the page and lifted her pen. This is where you specify exclusions, if any. Diane didn't hesitate. Bradley and Marla Whitaker, she said, voice steady and stripped of all pain. Excluded for cause, no contest permitted. Margaret looked up, eyebrows slightly raised, not in surprise but in respect. Do you want to include a justification note? Yes, Diane said, I do. Margaret slid a single blank sheet across the table. Diane picked up the pen, felt the weight of it settle into her palm and wrote slowly, every letter deliberate. For the ones who stood by. Not the ones who stood on me. Her handwriting looked steadier than she remembered, stronger, unshakable. She finished, folded the page once and slipped it into the will binder like the final stone placed inside a sealed tomb. Carla arrived moments later, carrying a slim black portfolio and an air of controlled finality. All documents prepared, she said. Filing occurs within the hour. Once submitted, everything becomes legally binding, irrevocable. She reviewed every line with surgical precision, signing and stamping where required. The echo of each notarization stamp sounded like a door closing, one after another after another. Lenora watched from across the table, her expression a quiet blend of pride and something deeper, relief, maybe vindication, the kind that doesn't shout. "You're sure?" she asked softly. Diane met her gaze, the answer already written in her posture. "I'm tired of grief being my legacy," she said. "This time I choose what continues." Margaret closed the binder and stood. "Congratulations, Diane, your estate is secure, your wishes are protected. No one can undo this." The binder clicked shut, a sound like a lock turning. When the others stepped out to process filings, Diane lingered alone in the office for a moment. She looked out the window at the city below, cars passing, people walking, lives beginning and ending quietly under ordinary skies. Her house was gone. Her name removed from the mailbox she once polished every Sunday. The past uprooted, sold, emptied. And yet, standing there, she felt more grounded than she ever had inside those walls. Legacy wasn't wood or foundation. Legacy was decision. Action. Truth. She opened her phone, a voicemail alert glowed on the screen. New message from Bradley. She didn't press play. She didn't need to hear it. Instead, she slid the phone into her purse and lifted her coat from the chair with slow, steady grace. Outside the office window, a storm cloud rolled across the horizon, dark and heavy, ready to break. But this time, the storm wasn't coming for her. The cottage sat just beyond the edge of town, a small brick home with ivy winding up its front column and a blue front door that caught the light like a held breath. Birds nested in the oak tree overhead, their calls threaded through the early morning air like calm stitching over old wounds. Diane stepped out onto the porch barefoot, coffee warming her palms, the boards beneath her feet smooth and solid. Home. A word that finally felt honest again. Inside, the rooms were small but filled with gentle light, the kind that didn't hide anything. A single bedroom, a sunlit kitchen, a reading nook carved out beside the window where she had stacked the books she once never had time to open. A garden bed stretched across the backyard fence, where sprigs of tomato vines had already begun to climb the wire trellis she installed herself. She knelt that morning in the cool soil, pressing seeds into earth that smelled rich and alive. Dirt smudged her palms and stained the creases of her fingers, not like burden but like creation. For the first time in years, she was building something with no one watching, no one judging, no one waiting to take it away. Sunday came quietly, as good days often do. Eli arrived just after noon, carrying a grocery bag full of ingredients and smiling in a way Diane hadn't seen since he was small. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and burning the first batch of garlic bread, laughing too hard to care. They ate on the porch, the plates warm in their hands, conversation easy and unguarded. No courtroom, no shouting, no landmines buried under dinner plates. Just life. After they finished eating, Eli leaned back in his chair and looked around with a slow smile. "It feels like everything is lighter here," he said. Diane nodded, fingers gently resting against her mug. "It is." He stayed until the last of the sun dipped behind the trees, then hugged her goodbye, long, firm, grounding. When he left, the quiet that followed felt full, not empty. Later that week, Lenora appeared at the cottage door carrying 2 wine glasses and a dark bottle tucked beneath her arm. She set them on the porch railing and raised her glass toward Diane with a playful, knowing curve to her smile. "To clean exits," she said. Diane lifted her own glass. "And clean her bank accounts." It wasn't triumph. It wasn't gloating. It was acknowledgement, the kind forged only after surviving something hard without losing yourself. They drank as the first stars began to prick through the sky, the night air warm against their shoulders. When Lenora left, the quiet felt like soft music. A month later, Diane sat at the kitchen table writing checks, not to attorneys, not to mortgage companies, not to patch holes others had carved into her life, but to begin something new. A small scholarship fund, Michael Whitaker Memorial Award for students studying forestry, the work Michael had built his life on. No press release, no public announcement, just a quiet line sent into the world in his name. Legacy, she thought, wasn't money or walls. It was direction. It was kindness. It was choice. One afternoon, she walked the familiar sidewalk leading toward Rosewood Lane. not intentionally, just a long loop that memory still knew by heart. She reached the corner and paused. The house stood transformed. Fresh paint. Bright red swing set in the yard. A laughing child racing across the lawn with a bucket of chalk in hand. A woman kneeling to tie his shoelace, smiling up at him with gentle patience. A new family. A new story. Diane watched for a moment, not with regret, not with longing, just recognition. Whatever lived there now had nothing to do with her. She turned and walked back toward the cottage, toward tomatoes stretching closer to sunlight, toward Sunday dinners that held only peace. Just before she rounded the corner, a breeze carried the faint sound of laughter behind her, light, unburdened, free. She didn't look back. Because peace wasn't something anyone could give her. And it was certainly nothing they could ever take. Late afternoon sun poured across the quiet neighborhood street, warming the pavement and painting long shadows that stretched like lazy brushstrokes. Diane sat on the front porch of the brick cottage, a soft breeze lifting the edge of her sweater. A mug of tea rested between her palms, steam curling upward like whispered grace. Ahead of her, Eli pedaled fast down the street, his bike wobbling with youthful determination. The helmet sat slightly crooked on his head, too big and slipping over his eyebrows every few seconds. He pushed anyway, legs pumping, laughter spilling behind him in bright echoes. "Look, Grandma," he shouted, taking a triumphant loop around the cul-de-sac. Diane lifted her hand in a small wave, the corners of her mouth tipping into a smile. Watching him, she felt something settle inside her, not relief, not victory, something cleaner. The sense that a storm which once seemed capable of swallowing her had passed without leaving rubble behind. She set the mug beside her and opened a thin envelope that lay on the table, a set of final property records from the county registrar. The pages fluttered between her fingers, crisp and official. There it was. Ownership released, transfer final. Diane Whittaker removed per voluntary sale. No surprise, no sting. Just the calm recognition of a chapter fully closed, not ripped away. She traced the edge of the document with her thumb. Her name gone from the house she once believed defined her life. Gone on her terms. Not theirs. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Eli walked up the porch steps, cheeks flushed from the wind, grinning. "I made something," he said, pulling a folded paper from his backpack. She took it gently, unfolding the edges to reveal a drawing, thick marker lines forming a small house with a bright red door, flowers lined along the front walk, and on the mailbox written in big uneven block letters. "DINE's house." He looked at her, waiting not for approval but understanding. "It's how I see it," he said quietly. "You get to have something that's yours." Diane swallowed, warmth pressing against her ribs. She stood and walked him to the fridge, smoothing the drawing flat with her hand before fastening it under a magnet shaped like a bluebird. When he stepped back, studying it with a proud nod, she reached forward and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. "Thank you," she whispered. Later, after she drove him home and returned to the cottage, the house felt different, not empty, not quiet. Alive. She opened her journal, the leather cover worn soft from years of clutching it like armor, and slid Eli's drawing inside, between pages where her handwriting once trembled with grief, then grew steady with resolve. No tears came. No ghost stirred. The past no longer towered behind her like a storm cloud. It rested somewhere far off, distant, harmless, silent. Bradley and Marla's names no longer surfaced in conversations. Neighbors didn't ask. Friends didn't mention them. They had been erased not by force, not by rage, but by irrelevance. Evicted from memory. Forgotten like old paint peeled off a wall that has since been rebuilt. Diane stepped back onto the porch, lifting her face into the wind. Leaves rustled overhead, sunlight flickered through branches, and the world moved forward without hesitation. There was nothing left for her to prove. Nothing left to hold. Nothing left to fear. She picked up her tea, still warm, and let the quiet wrap around her like soft cloth. And then, to no one but herself, and to the universe that had watched, she spoke the final truth, steady and sure. "They told me to stay out of the house, so I sold it while they were at work. And I never looked back."